The ceremonial master key was taken from the velvet case before Maya Sinclair ever reached the stage. Arthur Sinclair lifted it beneath the ballroom lights and placed it into Serena Sterling's ivory-gloved hand while Maya stood below in a tailored red evening gown, holding the red wax-sealed management contract against her palm. Arthur wore black. Serena shimmered in ivory beside him. Then Arthur smiled toward the audience and thanked the people who had shaped the company's first decade. Then Arthur smiled toward the audience and thanked the people who had shaped the company's first decade. He praised executives. He praised partners. He praised Serena as the future face of the brand. When he finally turned toward his wife, his voice remained polished. And tonight, we are honored to welcome one of our most distinguished guests. A guest, not a founder's partner, not the architect of the guest experience system that powered every property. A guest. Applause filled the room. Serena accepted the spotlight. Arthur accepted the illusion. Maya accepted the truth. Then she understood. Arthur was not celebrating a legacy. He was rewriting it. Maya did not wait for the speeches to end. She stepped away from the center of the ballroom while investors turned their attention toward the stage and cameras followed Serena's carefully practiced smile. Her pace never changed. Neither did her expression. By the time she reached a private executive corridor, the noise of the celebration had become distant. She opened the red leather portfolio and reviewed the document Arthur had spent years ignoring. The management contract was not ceremonial. It was operational. Every luxury suite, every concierge standard, every service escalation pathway, every executive hospitality protocol across the global collection flowed through a framework she had designed and legally administered. Arthur owned buildings. Maya controlled the engine. That mattered. She continued walking. The contract's revocation clauses remained intact, protected by signatures, governance provisions, and authority transfers established years earlier when growth mattered more than ego. Arthur had inherited prestige. Maya had built structure. There was a difference. She reached a restricted operations lounge and entered using credentials still recognized by the system. A secure dashboard illuminated across a private screen. Property status reports appeared. Regional performance metrics appeared. Operational authorization records appeared. Nothing had changed yet. That was the point. Arthur believed public recognition created power. Maya knew power was measured by what still worked after the applause ended. She reviewed one final page. Then she selected an encrypted communications channel reserved for executive operational directives. Her fingers paused for only a moment. Not from doubt. From accuracy. The message was concise. Preserve all management authority records. Suspend unauthorized modifications pending contractual review. Archive every access change executed within the last 6 months. She attached the required authorization code. Then she sent it. The instruction would arrive before sunrise and offices spread across the collection. The celebration behind her continued. The system ahead of her had already begun moving. Arthur thought he had removed her from the story. Maya had just opened the chapter he never bothered to read. The file stayed read. Then she left. The celebration continued long after Maya Sinclair left the ballroom, but she never returned to it. Near midnight, she crossed a quiet executive corridor inside the flagship property and stopped outside a door she had once entered almost every day for 10 years. The brass plaque was gone. That caught her attention first. Not because it carried her name, but because she remembered approving the design herself when the hotel completed its expansion years earlier. She reached for the access panel and entered the security code she had memorized long before Arthur ever became the public face of the company. Access denied. Maya tried again. The same result appeared. She stared at the screen for a moment. Then she requested a temporary override through an executive operations channel that still recognized her authority. Seconds later, the door opened. What waited on the other side was not an office. It was a dressing suite. White garment racks stood where operational planning tables once sat. Mirrors lined the walls where regional performance maps had been displayed. Designer handbags occupied shelves that had once stored guest experience manuals. An ivory evening gown hung in the center of the room beneath carefully adjusted lighting. Serena's room. Maya remained still. She remembered nights spent inside that space reviewing service recovery reports while properties across the country faced storms, staffing shortages, and unexpected crises. She remembered training managers. She remembered redesigning entire guest service systems. She remembered protecting the reputation of the collection when mistakes threatened the brand. Every process had started there. Every standard had been refined there. Yet the room now suggested she had never existed. Then she saw the final detail. A framed hospitality award still remained on a side shelf. The plaque recognized an innovation program Maya had personally created. Her name had been removed. Only the company logo remained. That was the moment. Not the ballroom. Not Serena. Not even Arthur's speech. This. Maya finally understood that Arthur had not been preparing to replace her. He had already done it in his mind months ago. The gala had simply been the public announcement of a private decision. He had reduced 10 years of work into a role that could be reassigned whenever it became inconvenient. The realization settled quietly. No anger arrived. No dramatic collapse followed. Instead, something else disappeared. Hope. The hope that Arthur still saw her as a partner. The hope that he understood what they had built together. The hope that recognition would eventually catch up with reality. It was gone. That was enough. Maya turned away from the room and walked toward a private executive archive maintained by the operations division. She reviewed ownership structures, management authorities, historical directives, and service architecture records. Her advantage was suddenly clear. Arthur possessed buildings. Serena possessed visibility. Maya possessed memory. She knew every system, every standard, every operational dependency that connected the collection into a functioning empire. More importantly, so did the people she had trained. Competence could not be reassigned with a speech. Loyalty built through expertise did not disappear because a nameplate vanished from a door. She closed the archive files and secured a copy of the original operational framework she had created years earlier. Then she made her choice. She would not fight to reclaim a room. She would reclaim the foundation. And foundations always outlast decorations. By sunrise, Maya Sinclair was no longer thinking about betrayal. She was thinking about systems. That distinction mattered because luxury hospitality was never built on marble floors, crystal chandeliers, or magazine covers. It was built on consistency. A guest paying thousands of dollars for a suite expected the same experience whether they arrived in New York, Aspen, Miami, or Napa Valley. 10 years earlier, Maya had recognized that truth before anyone else inside the Sinclair collection. She created the operational framework that connected every property into a single living organism. Her system measured more than occupancy. It tracked repeat stay recovery, VIP complaint resolution, suite readiness timing, executive concierge response, loyalty tier exceptions, private dining failures, and the exact number of minutes a high-value guest could feel ignored before the brand began losing trust. Service recovery protocols, executive concierge chains, VIP escalation matrices, black card guest exception rules, suite readiness standards, private dining recovery scripts, staff retention signals, loyalty architecture, performance accountability models. The collection looked like a hotel empire from the outside. Underneath, it was an operating system. Maya built it. Arthur inherited it. There was a difference. She sat inside a private workspace reviewing documents that few people had ever seen in their entirety. Each file traced the relationship between ownership and management authority. The buildings belonged to the corporation. The operational framework belonged to a separate management structure created during the company's expansion years. Most executives never cared about the distinction. Maya had designed the distinction. That was why the Red Wax contract mattered. She opened a series of archive directives and compared them against current authority assignments. Access permissions, executive approvals, service governance rights, property intervention authority. The pattern was clear. Arthur had spent years expanding his visibility while paying little attention to the machinery producing the results he claimed as his own. He attended interviews. Maya redesigned systems. He hosted investor dinners. Maya solved operational failures before they became headlines. He accepted awards. Maya built the standards that earned them. The imbalance had always existed. Only now did she see how dangerous it had become. Then another realization surfaced. Arthur's behavior had never been driven by confidence. Truly confident leaders do not spend years erasing other people's contributions. They do not need to. Arthur constantly positioned himself at the center of every success because he feared standing anywhere else. Maya remembered executive meetings where regional operators directed technical questions toward her even when Arthur sat at the head of the table. She remembered hospitality conferences where industry leaders asked for her recommendations while Arthur searched for opportunities to redirect attention. She remembered investors praising guest retention performance and watching Arthur answer before Maya could speak. Small moments, repeated often. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. Arthur did not simply want control. He wanted proof. Proof that he deserved the admiration attached to the Sinclair name. Proof that he was more than an heir. Proof that he could stand above the woman who quietly kept the empire functioning. The tragedy was that he had chosen visibility over competence. Maya closed another file, then another. By mid-morning, she had completed the first phase of her review. The revocation pathway remained legally enforceable. Operational authority could be reassigned. Governance rights could be withdrawn. Compliance notifications could be activated. Everything depended on timing. She prepared the next sequence of actions and secured the records. Then she transmitted a confidential request for verification to multiple operational divisions. No announcement. No warning. No spectacle. The strongest systems rarely needed noise. As the messages disappeared into the network, Maya understood something Arthur still did not. Buildings create status. Systems create power. And only one of them was about to move. Hospitality is the art of making people feel at home, but some men only know how to make a woman feel like a stranger in her own legacy. The truth is that most betrayals do not begin with a dramatic moment. They begin with a quiet revision, a name removed from a document, a decision made without consultation, a room reassigned, a contribution gradually separated from its creator until the creator starts looking like a guest in something she built herself. Maya Sinclair understood that now. Arthur had not stolen her confidence. He had tried to steal her place in the story. Those are different things. Confidence lives inside a person. A place in the story lives inside other people's memories. That was why the ballroom hurt less than the converted office. The speech lasted minutes. The erasure had lasted months. Yet the most important realization arrived afterward. Arthur had spent years managing appearances. Maya had spent years building infrastructure. One was fragile. The other was durable. That difference was finally about to matter. By early afternoon, Maya entered a private operations strategy room located inside a discreet hospitality consulting facility several miles away from the flagship hotel. The room was functional rather than luxurious. Large screens displayed regional performance reports. Property dashboards updated in real time. Operational maps tracked guest satisfaction metrics across the collection. This was familiar territory. Not celebrity. Not publicity. Competence. Maya placed the red leather portfolio on the table and began reviewing responses generated by the verification requests she had transmitted earlier that morning. The results arrived faster than expected. Multiple operational divisions had already confirmed management dependencies tied directly to the contract Arthur ignored. Executive intervention rights, service standard approvals, cross-property authorization controls, escalation governance procedures. The framework remained intact. That was significant. She continued reading. Several regional managers had responded with precise documentation supporting the original operating structure. No speeches accompanied those responses. No declarations of loyalty appeared. Professionals rarely worked that way. They simply protected systems that worked. Maya respected that, so she moved forward. A new document appeared on her screen. The first transfer authorization package. It would not remove ownership from Arthur. It would not change corporate branding. It would not trigger public drama. Instead, it would begin redirecting practical authority back toward the management architecture specified in the contract. The distinction seemed technical. It was not. Luxury hospitality depends on thousands of decisions made every day. Who approves service recovery for elite guests? Who authorizes executive interventions? Who validates operational exceptions? Who controls standards? Titles cannot answer those questions. Systems do. Maya reviewed every page before applying her approval code. Then she stopped. One final thought crossed her mind. Arthur believed power came from standing in front of a room full of people. Maya knew real power often sat inside a procedure nobody bothered to read until it was too late. She completed the authorization. Then she transmitted it. The response appeared moments later. Verified. Accepted. Scheduled. The first transfer had entered the system. No audience witnessed it. No cameras recorded it. Yet somewhere inside the machinery of the Sinclair collection, authority had just begun changing direction. The foundation was moving. Arthur simply had not felt it yet. 3 days after the anniversary celebration, Arthur Sinclair stood beneath a massive projection screen inside a luxury brand relaunch event hosted at one of the collection's most recognizable properties. The room looked exactly the way he wanted it to look. Investors occupied the front tables. Lifestyle journalists filled the media section. Strategic partners circulated through carefully designed networking spaces. Serena Sterling stood beside him in an ivory designer's suit, positioned as the embodiment of the company's new image. Cameras followed her movements. Social media engagement climbed by the minute. From the outside, everything appeared flawless. Arthur preferred appearances that way. He spoke confidently about modernization, brand evolution, and a new chapter for the Sinclair collection. He described expansion opportunities. He discussed market positioning. He presented polished projections. The audience responded favorably. Several reporters took notes. A few investors nodded. Serena smiled at exactly the right moments. Arthur felt the familiar comfort of attention settling around him. For years, he had mistaken that feeling for authority. Today was no different. Or so he believed. Then a journalist raised a simple question. Will Maya Sinclair remain involved in operational development moving forward? The room remained quiet. The question itself was reasonable. Arthur's response was not. His smile disappeared almost instantly. He answered too quickly. He dismissed the subject too aggressively. He redirected the conversation before anyone could ask a follow-up question. Several people noticed. Experienced professionals always do. The issue was not what Arthur said. It was how much energy he spent saying it. Maya's name had become a pressure point. That mattered. Serena attempted to smooth the moment by discussing future branding initiatives, luxury experiences, and public engagement campaigns. She also introduced a proposed signature guest experience built around influencer-facing luxury moments. Without realizing it bypassed 3 service recovery safeguards Maya had designed to protect elite guests from performative hospitality. The audience listened politely. Yet something subtle had changed. A few guests exchanged glances. One investor quietly shifted the conversation toward operational leadership. Another asked about service consistency across international properties. Arthur answered in broad terms. The questions became more specific. His answers became less comfortable. He knew the language of prestige. Maya knew the language of performance. There was a difference. Arthur could feel it. Later that afternoon, after the media portion concluded, a private strategy session brought together senior stakeholders and operational representatives. Arthur entered expecting approval. Instead, he encountered hesitation. A regional performance report required executive clarification regarding newly adjusted management authority channels. Another operational review referenced pending verification requirements. A third report requested authorization confirmation before implementing a collection-wide service initiative. Individually, the issues seemed minor. Together, they formed a pattern. Arthur frowned as he reviewed the documents. Why are these being escalated, he asked. The board representative answered carefully. Because those approvals traditionally moved through a different authority structure. Arthur immediately understood what the representative meant. He simply disliked hearing it. Maya's fingerprints remained everywhere. In the procedures, in the systems, in the operational logic that held the collection together. He closed the report and moved to the next item. Then the next. Every path seemed to lead back to a framework he had spent years treating as secondary. The realization irritated him more than it concerned him. For now, he still believed visibility would outweigh structure. He still believed control of the narrative would protect him. He still believed titles created loyalty. That was the illusion. As the meeting ended, another request appeared requiring executive review before implementation. Arthur stared at it longer than necessary. Across the room, several people waited for an answer. For the first time in years, he did not have one. The first signs were almost invisible. That was fitting because the systems Maya Sinclair had built were never designed to attract attention. They were designed to prevent problems before anyone noticed them. 5 days after Arthur Sinclair's relaunch event, requests began moving differently across the Sinclair collection. Executive approvals that once traveled through familiar channels paused for verification. Service exceptions required additional authorization. Operational overrides triggered compliance reviews. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. The machinery was not collapsing. It was recalibrating. Arthur sat inside the executive headquarters reviewing a growing stack of reports that all seemed to ask the same question in different ways. Who currently possessed final management authority under the governing operational framework? The answer should have been simple. Instead, every review led back to the same contractual language attached to the management architecture Maya had created years earlier. Arthur pushed one report aside and opened another. The result was identical. He still held the title of CEO. He still occupied the corner office. He still controlled public messaging. Yet practical authority was becoming harder to exercise. Directives that once moved immediately were now being evaluated through governance procedures. Requests that once received automatic implementation now required verification. The difference frustrated him. Why is this taking so long? He asked during a conference call with regional leadership. The response arrived respectfully. We're following the operating structure currently under review. Arthur ended the call with visible irritation. Respect remained. Compliance remained. But unquestioning execution was beginning to disappear. Across the collection, professionals were not rebelling. They were following procedure. That made the situation far more dangerous. Procedures are difficult to intimidate. Meanwhile, Maya worked quietly inside the strategy room that had become her temporary headquarters. Reports arrived throughout the day from operational divisions, compliance teams, and property management groups. The transfer authorizations approved earlier had begun activating. Authority pathways were shifting exactly as designed. She reviewed each update carefully. No celebrations. No speeches. Precision mattered more than emotion. One report caught her attention. A flagship property had delayed implementation of a collection-wide guest service initiative pending confirmation. From the Management Authority Office, Arthur's directive had been received. It had not been executed. Maya read the report twice. Then she moved to the next file. The system was responding. That was enough. Back at headquarters, Arthur attempted to reassert control through visibility. He scheduled executive meetings. He increased media appearances. He approved new branding campaigns featuring Serena. One Serena-approved campaign offered unauthorized suite upgrades to social guests without checking loyalty protections, privacy preferences, or operational capacity. The system rejected it automatically. The strategy looked impressive from the outside. Internally, however, operational friction continued growing. Every unresolved issue pointed toward the same reality. The company could still market luxury. Delivering luxury was another matter. One afternoon, a regional operations review brought together multiple departments through a secure video conference. Arthur joined expecting routine updates. Instead, several participants requested clarification regarding authority hierarchy changes. Others referenced governance notices they had recently received. One property manager asked whether future approvals should continue following traditional executive channels or the revised management framework currently being verified. The question lingered. Arthur answered carefully, yet uncertainty remained visible across the call. Not hostility, uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads quickly inside organizations built on consistency. After the meeting ended, Arthur remained alone in the conference room, staring at a screen filled with unresolved notifications. The collection still belonged to him on paper. The headlines still carried his name. But somewhere beneath the surface, the system he barely understood had begun making decisions without asking for his permission first. He had not lost control. Not yet. The problem was that control had started moving. And for the first time, it was moving away from him. The collapse did not arrive as a public scandal. It arrived as distance. Arthur Sinclair noticed it first in small places where power used to feel automatic. A week earlier, the executive assistant would have stood the moment he entered a room and prepared every document before he asked. Now the greetings remained professional but shorter. The urgency was gone. At first, Arthur dismissed it. Then he saw it again. During a private meeting with several operational stakeholders, conversations continued for a few seconds after he entered instead of stopping immediately. Nobody was disrespectful. Nobody challenged him directly. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The room no longer bent around his presence. Then Arthur issued a direct instruction to restore Serena's executive hospitality privileges across the flagship property. The property manager checked the system, remained professional, and answered, "We are waiting for verified management authority." Arthur looked at him. Nobody moved to soften the sentence. That mattered more than anyone realized. Arthur had spent years believing authority lived inside titles. Now he was beginning to discover that titles often borrow their strength from other things. Competence, trust, credibility. He was running short on all three. The signs multiplied. A scheduled discussion with a private banker regarding future expansion financing lasted less than half the expected time. The tone remained polite. The enthusiasm disappeared. Questions once accepted without scrutiny now required supporting operational projections. Arthur provided them. Additional requests followed. The private banker never raised his voice. He never expressed concern directly. He simply stopped extending confidence in advance. Arthur left the meeting irritated, then uneasy. That feeling stayed with him. Across town, Serena Sterling was discovering a different version of the same problem. Invitations that had arrived effortlessly for months began arriving less frequently. Several exclusive hospitality events quietly revised their guest lists. A luxury partnership campaign postponed discussions without offering a firm replacement date. One membership office informed her that certain collection privileges remained under administrative review. Serena attempted to treat each incident as temporary. Yet she noticed the pattern. People who once rushed toward proximity now seemed content observing from a distance. The attention she enjoyed had always reflected the glow of the empire around her. As that glow dimmed, the room temperature changed. Arthur still refused to acknowledge the larger reality. He doubled down instead. More interviews, more public appearances, more declarations about the future. Yet every effort seemed to produce less influence than before. During a regional strategy session, a property manager requested guidance regarding a guest experience issue affecting several locations. Arthur answered confidently. Seconds later, another participant asked whether the recommendation aligned with the original service architecture framework developed under Maya's management structure. Silence followed. Brief. Sharp. Arthur felt it immediately. The question itself was harmless. The implication was not. Even now, professionals trusted Maya's systems more than his assurances. He moved the discussion forward. But the damage remained. Then came the moment he could not ignore. A confidential report arrived summarizing operational compliance responses across the collection. Property after property referenced management protocols tied directly to the framework Maya had created. Not out of loyalty to her personally, out of trust in the system. Arthur stared at the report longer than he intended. A realization began pushing through the walls he had spent years building around himself. The people had never followed him because he was Arthur Sinclair. They followed results. Maya delivered results. He inherited the applause. For the first time, the fear he had spent a decade avoiding finally surfaced. What if everyone already knew? Worse, what if they had known for years and had simply been too polite to say it while Maya was still holding the empire together? What if the empire respected her work more than it respected his name? His hand tightened around the report. Then he looked away. The answer was already in front of him. And that was the problem. Arthur Sinclair arrived alone. That fact told Maya more than anything he could have said. 2 months earlier, he would have entered surrounded by advisors, public relations specialists, and people eager to remain close to the center of power. Now he walked into a private meeting room overlooking a quiet resort property, carrying only a leather folder and the weight of a problem he could no longer delegate. Maya was already there. A red portfolio rested on the table beside her. The same color, the same certainty. Arthur took a seat across from her and spent several seconds studying the room before speaking. It was a habit he had developed whenever he felt uncertain. He preferred controlling environments. This one belonged to Maya. He understood that immediately. "This has gone far enough," he finally said. Maya said nothing. Arthur continued. He spoke about stability. He spoke about shareholders. He spoke about preserving the Sinclair legacy. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding that had expanded beyond anyone's intentions. He suggested revised authority structures, joint oversight committees, transitional governance agreements, different titles, different responsibilities. The proposals continued. Maya listened carefully, not because she was considering them, because she wanted to hear what Arthur still believed the problem was. Eventually, he stopped speaking. The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. Then Maya opened the red portfolio and removed several documents. Operational reports, compliance summaries, authority reviews. The evidence was organized with the same discipline she had applied to every system she ever built. She placed them on the table. The collection is still functioning, she said calmly. Guest satisfaction remains strong. Service recovery times remain within standards. The properties are operating exactly as they were designed to operate. Arthur nodded impatiently. That's not the issue. Maya looked directly at him. I know. Another silence settled between them. Arthur leaned forward. For the first time, frustration broke through the careful language. You don't understand what's happening. Maya almost smiled. Not from satisfaction. From accuracy. No, Arthur. I understand exactly what's happening. She slid one report toward him. For years you thought ownership created authority. Another document followed. You thought visibility created respect. A third. You thought removing my name would remove my contribution. Arthur looked away from the papers. Maya continued. Her voice never rose. It did not need to. You spent 10 years protecting the title, Maya said. I spent 10 years building the reason the title mattered. Arthur said nothing. Maya continued. You inherited the buildings, Arthur. The people never belonged to you. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Arthur remained silent. Maya saw the truth reach him before he admitted it to himself. The empire had not turned away from him because of a temporary dispute. It had turned away because the people inside it trusted competence more than branding, trusted systems more than speeches, trusted results more than inheritance. The realization stripped away every explanation he had been hiding behind. Maya closed the folder. You never wanted a partner, she said. You wanted proof that you didn't need one. Arthur lowered his eyes toward the documents spread across the table. For the first time since the anniversary gala, he had no response prepared. No narrative to redirect the conversation. No audience to impress. Only the truth. Maya stood. The tragedy is that nobody was following your title. She gathered the portfolio. They were following the work. You kept the name. I kept the standard. Then she walked toward the door. Arthur remained seated in the room, surrounded by reports describing a system he never truly understood. Maya left first. The space belonged to him. Control did not. A guest can be asked to leave, but the person who owns the foundation always keeps the keys. That truth rarely reveals itself on the day of the betrayal. Most people expect justice to arrive immediately. They imagine dramatic confrontations, public apologies, or spectacular reversals. Real life is usually quieter. The consequences of arrogance often appear long after the applause has faded. Arthur Sinclair spent years believing power lived in titles, buildings, and public recognition. Maya Sinclair learned something different. She learned that systems outlive speeches. Competence outlasts image. And a person who understands how something truly works can never be erased simply because someone removes her name from the door. The painful lesson was never about losing a position. It was about discovering that she had been protecting a legacy for someone who viewed her as replaceable. Yet the freedom that followed came from a different realization. She was never the guest. She was the architect. Once Maya accepted that distinction, everything changed. She stopped fighting for permission. She stopped defending a role someone else could define. She stopped asking to be recognized by people committed to misunderstanding her value. Instead, she built something that reflected it. The opening morning of Sinclair Heritage arrived beneath clear skies and steady sunlight. The new resort stood on coastal property overlooking miles of protected shoreline. Guests moved through the arrival pavilion while hospitality teams welcomed them with the calm confidence that comes from working inside a system designed by someone who understands service rather than performance. Maya stood near the entrance in a tailored red blazer, reviewing final operational updates on a tablet before greeting the first arrivals personally. Around her were familiar faces, not employees who had followed a title, professionals who had chosen a standard, former managers, operators, guest experience specialists, and hospitality leaders from across the industry had joined the new venture because they trusted the work behind it. That mattered. The atmosphere felt different from every Sinclair event Maya had attended in recent years. Nobody was competing for attention. Nobody was managing appearances. The focus remained exactly where she always believed it should be. The guest experience, the service, the execution. Excellence had become visible again. A short distance away, a ceremony marked the official opening of the property. Maya accepted congratulations, thanked the team, and welcomed the first guests. Then she returned to what she loved most. Operations. Not prestige. Not image. The work itself. Across town, Arthur Sinclair arrived at the old flagship entrance in a dark tailored coat, expecting the doors to open because they always had. The security officer checked the system and stepped in front of him with practiced courtesy. Access requires verified management authority. Arthur looked past him into the lobby that still carried his family name. The doors remained closed. Maya never saw it happen. She was standing at Sinclair Heritage, greeting the first guests by name. She felt no satisfaction, no anger, no need to revisit the past. That chapter had already ended. The future no longer required permission from the place that tried to erase her. As evening settled over the shoreline, new guests arrived carrying luggage, expectations, and trust. Maya welcomed them with the confidence of someone who finally stood inside a legacy that belonged entirely to her. The doors remained open. The foundation remained hers. And for the first time in years, she was completely at home. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.